to
Bradley, it looks like you cut out on us.
oh no, am I up and running yet?
There you are. Hi.
He's back.
I'm back. I just didn't want to be alone on the screen, I guess. I wanted everyone else up here with me.
It's like the Brady Bunch.
Go,
Well,
Bradley, go.
I don't see any questions coming through yet. So feel free to put those questions in the chat so they can get sent over here and our panelists can answer them for you. Okay, it looks like we got a question. If I receive a phone call from BECU, how can I confirm if it's legitimate or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. Christy, I know you guys deal with that a little bit in what you do, but a lot of what I do every single day is kind of help people who have maybe received a spoof call and now they're kind of trying to pick up the pieces afterwards and figure out, what their next steps are. I would say first and foremost, if you're not expecting a call from, your financial institution or any trusted institute in general, that can generally be a red flag. Now, not to say that's always the case, but again, unexpected calls out of the blue, usually never a good sign. The other thing I would say, if you get a call from somebody claiming to be BECU and they start asking you for a ton of information, and I'm talking about full numbers, so full social security number, full date of birth, full card number, that's usually a red flag as well. Um, I would just add to that, you're never obligated to stay on the phone with anybody, even if they're claiming to be your financial institution. Feel free to hang up, give us a call back. Our number is going to be on the back of your debit or your credit card, as well as on our website, becu.org. That's going to be the safest way you can really ensure that it's BECU calling. That would be my kind of general tips on that from what I see. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Christy.
No, that sounds really good advice right there. That's probably something that I definitely would advise. If you're not expecting a call, just call the number of the company where you can research it, where you can find the direct line. Like Chris was touching on, it's spoofed calls. It's going to say BECU on there. And a lot of times they're going to use our phone number. It will legitimately look like we're calling you. So hang up and call back and get that number from a different source. Definitely. Yeah.
Awesome.
As a BECU member, that's what I do.
I'm glad to hear that.
Glad to hear that. Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
That's awesome.
So it does look like we got a few more questions that came through.
Cool.
How can I protect my loved one's information from being used after they've passed away?
That's a really good question. I deal with that a lot. I do a lot of elder abuse cases. And, in my experience, and this is just tradition, in our culture, like when someone passes, we want to memorialize them. So we'll oftentimes put in an obituary and publicize it out for everybody to see. And within that obituary, whether it's traditional paper, newspapers, or if it's an online guest book type situation, um, we usually will add everybody who's associated with them that's important to their life, who they're married to, how many grandchildren they have, where they spent their life, what they did. It's all right there for you. Not only are you exposing information of your loved ones. But really, it's the vulnerability of the situation that probably puts everybody at the most risk. They know it's an emotional time, and so you are a likely, you're a target basically at that point because they know that you're hurting, and they know that a lot of times, especially if it's a couple and their significant other passed, there's loneliness tied to that. So all
Christy.
Oh no, it looks like we might have lost her there. I guess to add, and Kip, I was going to maybe bounce it off to you here in a minute. I mean, especially with kind of the digital age, but to kind of add to what Christy was saying, I see it in so many cases where someone just had a loved one passed away and they're extremely vulnerable and maybe isolated or lonely, and that's when you may have somebody reach out. So, just kind of knowing that, unfortunately, in today's day and age, people are willing to take advantage of people who have just lost a loved one. I mean, I had a, specific instance where somebody was reached out to via Facebook because they had posted about it, and somebody found them. They had a public profile, and they ended up falling for a scam. So just making sure that if you're in a state like that, just kind of understand that people may come to you and you may think that they have good intentions, but that might not always be the case.
Yeah, the thing that I said, in my presentation a few minutes ago about how these days online crime, fraud, it's still rooted in some very basic patterns that we've seen for thousands of years, which is when you are in a situation that where other people can see that you're vulnerable, the death of a loved one, or you're in a frantic real estate transaction, trying to get the kids fed, and got to send that email off to my boss, because I got something that's due, and then here comes this other email saying, here's your wiring instructions. And you're like, oh yes, and unfortunately, the death of a loved one is just another vulnerable time that you can be attacked. And the thing about it is that the people that are attacking us, this germ metaphor is really apt, because they behave in a very amoral way. It's not that they hate us; they just don't care. They just want the money. And so it's just like, germs will make anybody sick. It doesn't matter. You can be rich, you can be poor, you can live in this state or that state. If the germ gets in your body, they don't care. They're just going to make you sick. So it's about, habits. I agree with what Christy said, and, about just being on guard, and just recognizing that you're vulnerable, and add a little bit of suspicion when anybody comes up to you and asks you to do something that is out of the ordinary.
Great. I totally agree. What is the best way to protect our grandparents and loved ones, especially if they're resistant?
That's a really good question. I think it differs person to person, to be honest with you. So you have somebody like my mom, for instance, very vocal, very open about anything, but my stepdad, he will not talk about finances. He will not talk about things. And it's very much, an era type thing. So he takes a little bit more probing, and for him, I find it's easier if I'm sharing things personal in my situation, and just kind of trying to get in there. So really the best way to protect them is just to be an active listener and to catch on to the red flags, because they could be right there in front of your face, and you may not even notice it, even though you've heard it 100 times, until someone else that or knows you brings it up to you and says, hey, that doesn't sound right, or maybe let's go talk to somebody else. And there's so many resources out there. So I would just really, even we've had people just bring their loved ones in to talk to maybe a team member at NFC, because they're used to dealing with them on a weekly basis. They go in there and, maybe cash a check or, do whatever. And they trust them, and it's not somebody super personal to them. So they don't feel a certain level of embarrassment, but they're open enough to talk to them about it. So I would just say use your resources, definitely be an active listener.
If I may, I'd like to just add that what I find in my work is that everybody shows up with a slightly different risk appetite. Some people just don't really think about the risks at all. They go bungee jumping, they love to parachute, they buy penny stocks, right? I mean, there's all kinds of risky behavior that some people feel very comfortable with. And then you get people on the other side that are burying their money in a mayonnaise jar under their house, right? Because they freak out. It's just the idea of loss really bothers them. And so I would say, see if you can figure out, is your elder relative, a very risk tolerant person? Well, you're going to have to talk to them in a different way. And you're going to have to probably accept the fact that by their very nature, it's going to be difficult to get them to behave in a less risky way. think about something that's important to them. Maybe tell them a story about how their behavior might, cause somebody else to be hurt that they love. I mean, not in a threatening way, of course, but I find that telling stories of real people that have had, something happen to them, it helps people identify, like, oh, that could happen to me. So anyway, just some thoughts.
Absolutely. I also
Yeah.
think, if you maybe are involved on a community level, so say, I take grandma to bingo every Tuesday at the BFW hall, right? Just making it a topic of discussion in general is so beneficial and probably one of the biggest educating tools that we have, just a public forum.
Agreed. Yeah, making it less taboo. It makes
Absolutely.
makes everyone less embarrassed when it does happen, or it makes them more aware.
Absolutely.
Let's see here. Can my child's information be used to commit fraud before they turn 18?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my advice is if you want to protect your kids, you're going to want to freeze their credit file. What? My kids have credit files? Yeah, your kids have credit files already. So you're going to want to figure out what are the freeze instructions, and you're going to want to contact each of the credit unions, and you're going to put a freeze, because that's the only way to prevent that kind of abuse. Um, all other solutions like credit monitoring will just tell you when something bad happens. And it's like, well, okay, so now you got to pick up the pieces. The better thing to do is just shut it down, because your kids aren't going to need credit cards for years. So it's not a problem. It's not going to bother them in the slightest. Anybody else want to add to that? I haven't actually worked on
Yeah.
any cases, but maybe somebody has.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll maybe refer back to Christy after my answer because she might have seen something specific, but I kind of wanted to go off on a little bit different path. Whereas, I'm seeing where, kids under 18, especially kids that are very active on social media and the internet, they are unknowingly giving out their information and not really realizing kind of the magnitude of the actions that they've taken. A lot of kids are falling for scams via social media, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, things like that, where they're offered money usually in return for, their personal information, or they're offered money if they give, their account information, or make deposits for somebody. So while it might not be somebody, kind of thieving their information on like the dark web or something like that, sometimes your kids are just giving out the information and not really realizing how important that is. So I think being able to talk to your kids about social media and kind of the dangers of talking to people that they might not know on there, and what to do if somebody approaches them and says, hey, well, this person asked me to deposit this check for them and send them some money back, is that something that's normal? And being able to have an open conversation without maybe, making them feel bad for falling for a scam or potentially giving out their information, and kind of showing them the importance of safeguarding their information, especially kind of in the digital age. But I don't know if you have any specific cases like that you've worked, Christy, or maybe somebody has, had ID theft for a minor.
Well, actually, my nephew had it. So I can't reiterate and stress enough what Kip was saying about the credit report locks. It's probably the best free tool that you'll ever have. My nephew went to get his first apartment, and lo and behold, he had an entire credit file he was unaware of. And it was all bad, and it prevented him from being able to start his adulthood life, right? It was really bad, and it's really hard to deal with on the back end once it happens. You have so many outlets that your social is used for, your credit's used for, and to clean that up is really hard. Even if you do all of the steps, it's still something that sticks with you for years. So I would agree with you, Chris. Definitely, early education, absolutely, hands down. Be aware of who you're talking to, what information you're giving, because you're right, they won't know the repercussions. Because they didn't have the exposure yet to, financial tools and things of that nature. So,
The only thing they know about credit is Dad's got a credit card. Can I use it?
yes,
Yeah.
DoorDash, Dad. Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think sometimes, a lot of them, like you're saying, Christy, they don't really know the repercussions. And, a lot of times when I end up talking to, teenagers, they view very much in the short term of things. They're not thinking about what the future holds for them. And, kind of, well, if I do this now, like, who cares? I can deal with it later, or, it's not going to affect me down the road, or kind of whatever their train of thought is there. But, you know, they don't really understand, and they're like, I'll deal with it later. So being able to kind of talk to them about that now is huge, because that's going to help them down the road.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. So let's see here. Things like Facebook posts that ask for fun personal questions, are they actually dangerous?
Absolutely.
Kip
Yeah.
wants to take the lead on this one. He's
Go for
excited
it,
for this
Kip.
one. Yeah.
Okay,
Saw
so
his eyes light up.
We're all thinking it.
yeah, so I shook my head the most vigorously. Everyone's like, okay, I guess he wins, right? Let him do it. Yeah, that's social engineering. You can pretty much count on it. Remember, I don't know if you remember, but in the presentation I made just a little bit ago, I talked about security questions that a lot of organizations want you to set up. It's just another way of proving your identity. But the answers to those questions are meant to be something memorable. So they're going to ask you things that, guess what? These Facebook polls are asking you the same stuff. And when you give the answers, that all goes into a database, right? There's not some friendly person behind that poll. There's criminals sitting around, running those things, and your answers and your name and your Facebook profile all go into a database. And later on, it's used to break into bank accounts and all kinds of places. So I know it seems fun, but it's not, because on the other side, you could end up with an identity theft. And as Christy said, there are mechanisms for dealing with it, but it's hundreds of hours of effort, and it's so frustrating. And who wants to do that? That's not how we want to spend our time. So please be careful about that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I can really add much else to that. That was the home run answer. So
hopefully you
I
are
will
on
say,
pace.
Yeah, right.
when you're picking your code words, make sure it's not something you've put in one of those polls.
Yeah,
Right.
code words are great, and obviously, I always recommend code words to our members if they don't have them, just because that's going to add that little bit of extra step. If your ID, or your identity, I should say, I'm sorry, is being compromised, or your personally identifiable information, that can be like the last line of defense to potentially protect your accounts, because we have a lot of people who are impersonating our members once they have their information, but usually the one piece of information they might not have is going to be that code word. So adding one of those is huge.
Would you talk about that, because I'm not even sure. I don't think I've heard this before. How does a code word work? Can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, so kind of at the most basic level, a code word is literally a word that you can add onto your profile. So it's something we store in our system. Every time a BECU rep goes to pull up your profile, they'll see this specific code word. Now, our reps are, required to ask, do you have a code word on your profile, before they can proceed. With these specific members, and then the member provides the code word. Once they've done that, they can proceed with verification. Obviously, the other stuff, fraud mitigation questions, if they're in person checking photo ID. We do require it might have changed. So, if there's questions on this, we can get back to it. But I believe you have to go in person to add a code word. I think you can do it online through DocuSign now as well, which has some additional verification there. But ultimately, it's a code or a code word that's unique to you, that nobody's going to have. So that's going to be a big thing. And again, if you have somebody calling you that's claiming to be BECU, they're never going to ask for your code word in that manner. So, be wary of that. But yeah, it's a tool I recommend to all of our members, because again, I can't tell you how many times that one little, word, whatever it might be, has saved the member from, a complete account takeover.
Fascinating. Okay,
Yeah.
I hadn't heard of that yet. That's great. If you didn't catch my presentation, I want to say something else, which is, if you are going to set up answers to those security questions, make sure you choose answers that don't really matter to the question. So, for example, if they say, what city was your father born in, put in like Orange 52 as the answer, and then put that in your password manager so that you'll remember it. You don't have to keep it up here. You put it in your password manager, but that can help keep you safe. It's not a code word, right? That's different,
Hmm.
but it's just another way to keep those security questions from being so guessable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
I love that. Does BECU have any information about avoiding mortgage scams?
Yeah. I don't know if there's anything. I know kind of at the beginning of this Q&A panel, Brad, you were kind of speaking to the fraud resource that we have on our website. There might be something specific on there. One thing I will say is I can attest to, personally that our reps are pretty diligent about making sure, where wiring instructions are coming from, especially with mortgages. I think Kip kind of touched on that earlier, getting an email with wire instructions and not really realizing what it is. So that's kind of one thing our reps are pretty diligent on. But I would assume somewhere in our mortgage resources, and again, somebody might be able to answer this better, but there should be something regarding mortgage fraud. And I know we have one of these Q&A sessions for mortgage as well. I don't know if that's going on at the same time, but there are a number of mortgage resources on our website as well.
Does BECU offer any type of cyber training for its members?
Yes,
I guess
I'd like to know that.
Yeah, I guess it kind of depends on, what you're looking for with cyber training specifically, like what I guess what that's referring to exactly. But again, the fraud resource page that Brad had shared at the beginning of this Q&A panel is obviously going to be a great resource. Just our website in general, you'll see a number of things. We'll regularly post about kind of ongoing fraud trends and what's going on. Obviously, these member summits are great resources where we have someone as knowledgeable as Kip here, kind of giving us a little bit more about cybersecurity, where we might not be the absolute experts on that, and that's why we have him here. But yeah, our website generally is going to be the best place. And again, if there's ever any questions on protecting your account online and kind of your identity online and personal information, we're always available too. If you just call in to our contact center, our NSC reps are very helpful as well.
We offer through the resource page, a free cybersecurity course that you can take.
Mm.
Oh,
Um,
great.
and so, yeah, and that's partnered with Know Before. So they do a lot of educational pieces, and it's definitely free of cost. But yeah, there is a lot of cybersecurity training out there, but that's something I would utilize if you're interested in that. That is something BECU does have.
Oh, that's great. And I can tell you, as somebody who works in the cybersecurity industry, that KnowBe4 is considered to be a top vendor of cybersecurity education. So, uh, way to go, BECU. That's great.
How can you protect yourself from romance scams in the digital age?
Boy.
I think we all probably have something to say about this one. I
Oh
can see the
yeah,
smiles on
don't we?
everyone's faces. Yeah, I mean, I personally deal with them, and I'll try and keep it somewhat brief for y'all. But I deal with them, daily where I see these. I mean, what I tell members with a lot of scams, because a lot of these romance scams really revolve around, some of them are just strictly, where you have someone that's, again, vulnerable, maybe lonely, isolated, where they're really trying to find love, or companionship, and they kind of get lulled into a false sense of security where they're then sending this person money, just to support them because that's what they want to do. But we also have cases where, they're also getting promised money in return. Hey, my dad just died. His inheritance is in another country that we have to get, and I'm in this country right now and I have to get over there, but I have to pay this lawyer here. And I know it sounds a little kind of, ridiculous, but that's really what these are, and a lot of what we see. So, I always say, if you haven't met them in person, or if you're not regularly like interacting with them, and even nowadays they can kind of spoof FaceTime and things like that. And Kip probably can speak on that a little bit more, but you know, if it sounds too good to be true, or it maybe seems like there's a number of red flags that aren't adding up, it probably is too good to be true, unfortunately. So,
And I would also just like to add, let's take a moment back and why don't we go a little bit old school here? Meet people in person, meet that person at the grocery store. Because, like I said, I think 1 in 7 profiles are fake. And so your odds,
That's crazy.
it's a huge number. So your odds of being targeted are huge. And some of the events that we're seeing, they're really investing time in these relationships before they go in to even ask for any resources.
months
So,
and months and
yes,
months.
if
Yes.
not years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and you can have people on FaceTime, and that's not the same as meeting them in person. And I've even seen that where they have met someone in person just once over the course of a couple of years. But they become those schemes become elaborate at some points too, because they can get a lot of money from people and they know it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just say that again, this comes back to you're emotionally vulnerable, and there's somebody out there that wants to take advantage of you because of that, and it's tough. I mean, you can't get into a committed relationship without being vulnerable, right? A healthy one. So yeah, this is a really awful thing to have happen to you when you're just trying to find a companion. And but boy, I just want to reaffirm the advice you heard here is good.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Kip, this one kind of, I think, goes to you. What prevents password manager sites from being hacked?
Yes, you should ask that question, because if you're going to put all your eggs in one basket, you should know about that basket, right? I mean, that's really what you're saying. Is that a wicker basket? Is it going to get dropped out of an airplane? You know, how good is this thing anyway? So it's a great question. You should ask it. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you. Every password manager is under attack, period, the end. Because it's a treasure box, right? If a criminal can get their hands in your password manager, then they feel like they're going to win. So you need to make sure that you've got a basket that you're putting all your eggs into that's made of titanium and has airbags that'll deploy, on a moment's notice, and so on and so forth. Now, I gave a recommendation in my presentation for a product called 1Password. And I recommended that not because I get a financial incentive or any kind of benefit for mentioning it for me, but because my team examined that product for its resistance to being attacked and to being broken. And we found that it's very, very attack resistant. And so we use it, and we feel confident in it. If we ever feel like it's not being as well cared for as it seems to be now, we'll switch to another product. Because guess what? We ended up at 1Password because the previous product we used was starting to show signs that it wasn't as trustworthy as we thought it was, and we left before anything awful could happen. So that's another aspect of this cybersecurity thing: is things change all the time, and there's really no set it and forget it on anything. And I'm sorry to tell you that, because that's not what you want to hear. I get it, but anyway, so I hope I answered the basic question, which is, can I trust these online password managers? Not all of them, but there are some out there that I think you can trust, and I gave you one example.
I have another question for Kip. What are your thoughts on services like Dropbox or Evernote for storing confidential documents or information?
So the services themselves, I don't think, are making guarantees about the safety of sensitive data that you would put into them. So that's first thing to note, right? Second thing to note is that a lot of the safety of any sensitive data that you would put in there is going to rest on the forms of authentication that you use on it. So if there's two-factor authentication available, you should turn that on. You should have the longest, most complicated password that site will accept, and you should have your password manager make it for you and store it in your password manager so that you can use it when you want to get in there. And I think if you can set really great authentication according to the advice that I gave earlier, then it might be okay. The best answer, though, is you want to use cloud storage that has some kind of encryption that you control. Encryption that you control plus strong authentication, most criminals are going to just walk right by you because that's just too much effort.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And that's really, by the way, that's the goal these days on the internet, is just to be a tough target, right?
Yep.
It's not perfect security.
Mhm.
Don't try for that. Just be a hard target. Think about the club. Have you ever seen anybody use one of those red clubs on their steering wheel in the park and ride? Car thieves know how to defeat the club, but they're not going to bother because it just takes time, and they're going to get caught if they hang out of the car leaning in the window trying to mess with that thing. They're just going to walk right by and go get the Kia or whatever that doesn't have a club on its steering wheel. So just that's what you want to do.
That's great advice.
Yes, I love that metaphor. If I accidentally give remote access to my phone or device, what is the best way to make sure that it's safe?
Oh, is this for me?
It's for anybody.
We can. I mean, I can speak on it as far
Go
as like
for
a BECU aspect is concerned. I mean, anytime where we have one of our members stating that, hey, I gave access to one of my devices, we always recommend, okay, unplug or turn off that device ASAP. The other thing we always recommend too is, we're going to lock down your online banking. We don't know if they potentially access that, and we do have tools and resources to see kind of the logins and which occurred. But again, if it's logging in from your same device, even if it's remote access, it still might show up as such. So we always recommend, in some of those cases, we might need to change your account numbers. We're going to have to change your online bank credentials. We're going to have you get your device scanned before, for any sort of malware, ransomware, viruses, before we allow you access back into your online banking. So, I know obviously accidents happen, but we are seeing a lot of kind of, these fraudsters getting remote access by saying that they work for Microsoft or they work for Apple or they work for whoever it might be, even sometimes your own bank security, to get access. And then once they're in, they can do a whole mess of damage. And Kip, you probably have a little bit more as far as that's concerned and on what they do once they're in. But as far as a BCU standpoint, we're looking at a full account takeover, potentially. So,
yeah, I think that's correct. And I told you that cyber is always changing, and that criminals are constantly innovating and trying to find new ways to attack us. Well, at the high end of these device takeovers are technologies like Pegasus. Pegasus is the name of a very advanced piece of technology that is designed to silently compromise your device, to completely take it over, but to do it in a silent way. And now most people aren't going to encounter this these days, but as this technology becomes more and more available, as it's more and more understood, I expect that it is going to be become more common, that people will experience this. Now, some of this malware is so insidious that even reinstalling the device doesn't completely get rid of it. Like rolling it back to factory defaults doesn't get rid of it. Now, this is I'm explaining something that's like really super advanced that isn't common right now, but I'm only doing it to illustrate, like what's the potential here. What's the worst case scenario that you might find yourself in. It's not common, but it could happen, and maybe not at that level. But I'd say that the advice you just got about how you're going to have to reset your phone is probably the best thing any of us can do at this stage.
Really, to add to that as well, because that's all really great advice. I think it's overlooked oftentimes when somebody has given access to their PC, laptops, and especially if they're manipulating your BECU account while you're on the phone with them, they have access to everything on there. So when
Mhm.
you're done resetting your passwords with us, redoing your account numbers, you need to do it for all of your financial institutions. They have all of that. And just because you haven't seen them do it, or even be aware of it immediately, it doesn't mean it won't happen the next day. So it's
Yeah.
important that you stay on top of that, especially if you've been exposed.
This is
Mhm.
really insidious stuff, and it gives me no pleasure to share these kinds of details, right? Because the facts are pretty scary. Nobody needs to talk in a spooky voice.
Yeah, I mean, the only, and I know we're kind of, long-winded answer, but even if it's just for a little while that you allowed access, let us know, because if you
Yeah.
don't let us know,
Mhm.
we can't help you. And if you get it done now and take the steps now, that's going to prevent, again, like Christy was saying, even if you don't see anything right now, well, I only gave them access for, a minute, 2 minutes. It's a lot easier to prevent fraud from happening before it happens than having to try and pick up all the pieces and figure it out. It's
Yep.
a lot easier to protect your money from going out than it is to get it back for you, and a lot
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
less hassle. So,
Very true. Where can I find more information about preventing fraud?
yeah,
Well, I can't say it enough. Our wonderful fraud center.
Mhm.
It has such great
I was
resources. It
gonna,
really
yep.
does. It's impressive. And a lot of the government agencies. So you're gonna go on FTC. You're gonna go. IRS has a fabulous fraud area. A lot of these government agencies have top notch um, information and tools for you and things that you don't think of, especially when you're in a high stress situation such as like identity theft, or
Mhm.
you're dealing with account takeovers. You're stressed out. It's not fun. So it's very easy to access, and it's very readable. So you don't have to work in fraud. You don't have to be in cybersecurity. It's put in terms that you would easily be able to understand when you're not involved in this daily.
The FBI runs another website that I find very helpful. You just do a web search for FBI fraud tips. It'll come up in one of the top results.
Yeah.
Thank you. Looks like we're down to just a minute left, so I think we could squeeze one more question in here. And that last question is, what do if I find out my information has been involved in a breach?
A lot of the same steps, I would say. Your credit report, freezing your credit report. If a lot of times you don't know what's been exposed, but always assume that it's your personal information, that it's the most important information, and use those report resources and
Mhm.
contact your banks. Let them know your information's been exposed, because here at BECU and at most financial institutions, if you let them know that you think your identity's been compromised, they can add a flag to your account. It's a precautionary measure. It doesn't stop you from having any services, but if someone calls in and tries to act like they're you, they're going to take extra steps to protect your accounts.
And with BECU as well, kind of like we talked about earlier, adding that code word, that's a huge thing to do as well. And BECU does offer an identity theft checklist. It's available at our NFCs in person or on our website, becu.org. That's going to give you kind of a rundown of what we suggest doing.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys all so much.
Thanks for
Thank you
having
for
us. That was a
having
lot
me.
of
Yeah.
fun.
Thank you,
Yeah,
everyone.
great
Yeah.
Yes.
questions.
Yeah.
Thanks for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.
Yes. Thank you all again. It's been great.
Have a wonderful evening.
Yes. You too.